Well, hey folks, Real Honestly with Jim Rickland, and here's another Starcade reflection show, so to speak. I'm going to talk about the main event of Starcade 83, which was Ric Flair versus Harley Race in the steel cage match for the NWA title. And then the Ric Flair versus Vader match for the WCW title at Starcade 93. Now, obviously, besides the common denominator Ric Flair, there are also two big landmark world title matches, but from two different eras. 83 was obviously the first Starcade. 93, Starcade was well established. Even though WCW creatively was kind of on its ass at that point, they were starting to turn some things around. But, that's another video for another day. If you guys enjoyed the videos I did for Sting versus Hogan, Starcade 97, and Nash versus Goldberg at Starcade 98, this is going to be a little less rant-filled, as I actually enjoyed the 83 and 93 main events very, very much. 83 obviously is much more historic. I will dive into a little bit of the history, but do not worry if I don't dive into a ton of the history. But there is some good stuff to look back on. Now, obviously, Ric Flair started wrestling, I believe, 72. He did have that bad plane accident in 75. He came back from it, really transformed his body, lost a lot of weight, really transformed his work and how he worked and everything, and became one of the best. If you Ricky Steamboat, in the 70s and even into the early 80s. They had some great matches. He just had great matches all around, and winning some secondary titles and stuff like that, TV, U.S. title, and, the Mid-Atlantic area. But he also had become world champion a couple times. Pretty much kind of like Dusty. Dusty had only become champion a few times, but Flair had tasted NWA Championship gold. And earlier in 83, he had lost it back to Harley Race, and Harley Race was then a 7-time champion. 8 times unrecognized, because he did win the title from Ric Flair sometime in 84. I don't remember the exact date. I think it was March or April or something like that. And he didn't have it long, but it was unrecognized by the NWA, so it was just returned to Ric. That stuff's all muddy and everything. And diving into the NWA title, I'm not even going to attempt to do that into a deep dive. Somebody like Cornette or various other people or plenty of other wrestling fans that are older than me could do that. Or plenty of wrestlers that know about the NWA a whole lot more could do that. But I do remember seeing this. I saw it on when a buddy of mine, his uncle actually had a tape that he had gotten from a friend of his. And I saw it at a very young age. I think it was 5 or 6 when I finally saw this. And I saw Harley Race and Ric Flair just tear it up and just have this great classic. It was passing the torch match and Harley doing so much good stuff. And this truly was a Flair for the gold. That's how they were building it. That's how they built Starcade. The first Starcade was all built around Ric Flair being crowned as the guy. Harley had been wrestling for a number of years, 20 plus, I think, by that point, or at least about 20. His body was starting to break down. He knew that he needed to find somebody, and he wanted to put Ric over. He was probably told to do it, but I'm sure that him and Harley and Ric always had some really good matches. And this was no exception. The whole Flair for the gold thing, building it up. Ric gained his great entrance. Harley gained his great entrance. The arena was hot, and the crowd was hot. And Gene Kiniski was the referee. My only complaint about this match is Gene Kiniski tried to treat it too much like a regular match instead of like a cage match and letting these guys fight. But Gene Kiniski was also old school, a former NWA champion himself, losing to Dory Funk Jr. And there was some really good history with this. Jim Crockett, and Dusty, they knew how to promote the big event. They really, really did. Jim Crockett does get quite a bit of flack for his business management skills, but this was a really, really good event. And Starcade 83 actually does hold up for the most part. There are a couple matches I don't necessarily care for, but that's going to happen on any event. But it's all built up to Harley versus Ric. And it was a great cage match. It was bloody. It was brutal. They hit some good shots, some good use of the cage. It had this big feel of just like a fight, just a goddamn fight. And just watching these two guys, Flair being the young, sort of up-and-comer, even though he'd been wrestling for about 10 years. 10, 11 years by that point, even taking out the plane crash. Yeah, about 11 years. Harley, well-established as a veteran, and you could tell passing of the torch is what was going to happen in this, and it's what should have happened. Now, yes, Kiniski did get involved a little bit too much, and I said about that, but maybe he was told to do that. Maybe he, the referee, I'm not saying the referee went into business for himself, but maybe instincts kicked in. He wanted it to be a good, clean fight, despite the fact it was in a fucking cage match. But, what was great about this is Flair was the one to win. And he should have been the one to win. And this is how you book a guy who had been a heel in the past as a babyface to be somebody that dethrones the heel and goes on to be the new guy. That's how you pass the torch properly. And Harley would wrestle for a number of years. I think he would wrestle even into 1990. But mainly that had to do with finances and stuff like that when his a wrestling promotion that he had funded went on its ass. I think in Kansas City. It went on its ass. That's why he had to go to WWE, apparently, because he needed money, which, whatever. He wouldn't be the first wrestler to lose money and have to go work for Vince or have to keep working longer. So I'm not going to fault him there. Flair and Race did cut a really good pace in this. Yes, it is a long match. I think it's at least 25 to 30 minutes. There's some long entrances and stuff like that, and Flair cuts a really, really good promo, drenched in blood and stuff like that, and the blonde hair really did add quite a bit to it as he had the blood all in his hair. But it was a really, really good classic, babyface versus heel world title match, and the right guy went over, and then Flair just went on to have such a dominant run as NWA champion. Looking in the history leading up to all that, the history like afterwards and like leading up to like how he did in the NWA, he faced off against Dusty Rhodes at 2 straight Starcades, 84 and 85 respectively. 84 was the one that would stop Dudes of Blood. I didn't really care for that. I get it. They actually worked they work really well together. Dusty and Flair is like one of the greatest rivalries of all time. And they were always able to vary up those matches. But so after Starcade 83, Flair was the guy and the NWA world champion. He traveled everywhere. He traveled to Japan, traveled everywhere. He did some really, really good stuff. And he did. And he worked every night. And he worked really, really hard and put guys over. Didn't matter what territory. He would put guys over without them beating him for the title, like he did it with the Von Erichs. He did it with Kerry. He put Kerry over in, at the David Von Erich Memorial Show, which such a tragedy about that. But all through the rest of the 80s, he'd work with Dusty. He worked with, I believe, Ricky Morton in one of the Great American Bashes. I want to say it was Great American Bash 86. I believe it was Great American Bash 86, which they need to make some of those available on the network. Get those tapes and stuff like that. But Flair would just do this kind of stuff, and he would work really, really hard, really, really exceptionally. And yes, eventually all the stuff would, it would get muddy around 88, 89. Even though he was still champion, he put over Sting in that great Clash of Champions 1 match. He would face Luger through much of 88 into even a bit of 89. He faced Ricky Steamboat at Clash of Champions. Well, he faced him at Chi-Town Rumble, lost the belt. 2 out of 3 falls at the Clash of Champions in the Superdome. George Scott didn't promote and got fired for it because he's an idiot. And then won it back at Wrestle War, and then the whole feud with Terry Funk happened. And then things really started to get muddy because Sting wanted the Great American Bash and all that. And so, yeah, then Flair would go on to WWE for about a year and a half and then would come back to WCW. During this time, so the Starcade main events, actually, if you think about it, the main events had, if I'm right, it was Starcade 83 was main evented by Flair. So it's Flair and Race. Flair and Dusty in 84, 85 respectively. 86, I want to say it was him against Nikita. 87, I think it was him and Ron Garvin, if I recall correctly, because it was going to be Magnum in 86, but he had that car accident. And then in 89, 88 he faced Luger. 89 he faced Sting in the in that round robin tournament. And then 90 was the Black Scorpion thing, which that was terrible. But 91 he wasn't there because he was in WWE. 92 he wasn't there because he was in WWE. So 93 is pretty much where, like, Rick, it was big business. His family was able to see him live, which was absolutely great. I think his parents were actually able to be there, he said in interviews. So yeah, Flair, between those 10 years, had really been well established as the guy. But then you look at the flip side. Like I said about Race, and I'm not going to talk about Race much anymore because nothing against the guy, but after 83, he would still wrestle, but his time was winding down because he'd wrestled so goddamn long. Then Vader really got over. He got over in the AWA, a little bit. He was really popular in Japan. Like, him and Inoki, did really good business because Vader just beating and eating Inoki alive was absolutely wonderful. Mainly because Inoki knew that it would get a shocked reaction from the crowd. And Inoki was a smart businessman at that time. Some of the decisions he would make a little bit later in New Japan, like in the 2000s, or at least like early 2000s. But Vader was really well established in Japan. He would also start in WCW. He ended up being Tom Zenk in, I believe, one of his first pay-per-view matches, or at least his first appearance. He wrestled, I want to say Halloween Havoc. He wrestled against, no. He wrestled against Stan Hansen in one show. And I don't remember if it was Halloween Havoc or if it was Great American Bash 90. Because I know Hansen beat Luger for the U.S. title at Halloween Havoc 90 and then lost it back at Starrcade 90. But Vader was getting established as a monster, but he was also going between there and Japan. Then he was, in 91, he was starting to get more over. In 92, he became world champion by beating Sting at Great American Bash 92, after Sting had just beaten Luger at Super Brawl 2, which Super Brawl 2 is still one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time, mainly for two matches. Well, actually, yeah, mainly for two matches, but especially the opening match, Pillman versus Liger, for the WCW Light Heavyweight title, one of my favorite matches, still holds up today. I will fight anyone if they disagree. Such a shame about Pillman. But anyways, back to Vader. Wins the title at Great American Bash 92. He does lose it to Simmons soon after. Because Simmons beat him, and I think Vader had an injury or something like that. Because he wasn't on TV a ton, and then he did end up wrestling Nikita at Halloween Havoc 92. He wrestled Sting at the King of Cable finals at Starrcade 92, which is one of my favorite matches. In fact, I may do a top 25 favorite Starrcade matches of all time list sometime down the road. Who knows? I could probably actually write that down. In fact, I might write that while I'm at work, so look out for that list. Why the hell not? Why not? Let's have some fun. But anyway, so Vader then becomes WCW champion pretty soon after this. And feuds with various people. He faces Sting in the White Castle of Fear strap match. Flair ends up coming back and having the Flair for the gold stuff because he can't wrestle yet because of the no-compete clause, but he can still appear on TV. Vader is entering, he has a feud with Davey Boy Smith at Super Brawl 3, I believe. And I think Slamboree 93. They had some pretty good matches, actually. I mean, Davey Boy, especially at that point, when he was motivated, could really have some good matches. And Vader had a really dominant run as champion. I think Sting beat him for the title somewhere in there, but it wasn't recognized by anybody like WCW or whatever. So Vader pretty much held the title for much of 93. Recognized, even though Sting did win the title from him, I think. It was either in Germany or Japan. I want to say it was Japan. But building up all this, Vader's champion, having some good matches, even with injuries and stuff like that. They're having him work tags and six-mans and stuff like that when he is injured. So he can still get some moves in, but he doesn't have to work a ton. And all this time, Flair's getting back. They're back with the Horsemen. They feud with Pillman and Austin. They have some good matches, Hollywood Blonde, stuff like that. Flair faces Rick Rude at Fall Brawl 93. Rick Rude becomes the WCW International Heavyweight Champion, which I did that, and which was worse stuff. It was called Badly Booked Titles, because it would have been too lengthy of a title to say, Universal title and WCW International title. But Flair at that point, he was still obviously in the main event and seen as the main event star, but it seemed like maybe he was starting to fade a little bit because Vader was the guy. They were starting to push Sid, and had it not been for the Scissors incident, it would have been Sid versus Vader at Starrcade 93, or at least that seemed to be the general consensus on TV. So, Sid ends up getting fired, and what ends up happening is Flair's slotted in. So it's Flair versus Vader. So Flair is pretty much suddenly just put into it, and they did some good stuff building it up, don't get me wrong. Vader and Flair had really good chemistry, Flair being David and Vader being Goliath. There was some really good shit to it. And the match itself was fantastic. I think Flair either got a chipped tooth or a busted lip or something, because he was bleeding severely, and it was up here, so I think he did get a chipped tooth. But they had a really, really good match, and like I said, David Goliath, you had Vader using his power, Flair using his cunning, trying to chop Vader down. Harley Race being Vader's manager, which that added a little bit of spice to it, where Harley's he's retired, but he still wants to see Vader beat Flair, something that Race could not do at Starrcade. It was a great build, and Flair ended up getting the victory by getting a roll-up and winning the title. And I always found it funny that the WCW title at this point was such a carbon copy of the WWF title that it was almost like it almost could have brought a lawsuit for just how much of a copy it was. And I'm not saying the WWF title was totally, like, wholly original, but that was so established that it almost seems like WCW was copying it. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Take a look back at the title that Flair won there, and even the Vader was holding, like, earlier in the year. And then take a look at the wing belt that WWE had, and tell me that they don't look the same. But yeah, Flair, 10 years apart, he wins the NWA title in '83, and then in '93, still proving he's the man, wins the WCW title. And from there, he would go on. He would feud a little bit more with Vader. He would have a great match with Ricky Steamboat at Spring Stampede '94, a forgotten classic, and one match that I think everybody should go out and watch. Spring Stampede '94, Steamboat versus Flair, really good match. But this whole, the whole point of this video was just talk about these two matches and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed looking back on some of this stuff. Because honestly, taking a look at these, for different reasons, both these matches are pretty damn iconic. And the moments are iconic. Flair being able to be champion in essentially two time periods in the NWA WCW era. Because he proved right there he hadn't lost a goddamn step. If anything, he was better. Even into his 40s, he was still really damn good. And Vince kind of missed out on the opportunity to use Flair a little better than he did. I know he wanted to go with youth, but it's a little bit of a shame that he couldn't have worked something out with Flair to have Flair wrestle at WrestleMania 9, because I hate to say it, that might have made WrestleMania 9 just a little bit better than the absolute shitfest that it was. Though some argue that 11 was worse than 9, and I'm not gonna say that either argument is bad. 9's just more famously bad, but that's another video for another day. I really enjoyed looking back on both of these. I obviously would give the edge to the '83 main event, as it was the first Starcade, great passing the torch and stuff like that. Flair beating Vader was great, and it was a great moment, a great emotional moment, and his family got to see him and all that. But obviously '83 is better, but it's just cool to see Flair win titles in two different periods of the NWA WCW company. So that's what I have to say. What do you guys think? Are there other shows you want me to look back on, like comparison main events and stuff like that from WCW? Like, make sure they're kind of from the same pay-per-view, or not the same pay-per-view theme. Let me know. Anyway, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. It's been Real Honesty with John Ritalin, and I will see you soon.